Hey everyone. I never thought I'd be that guy posting his story online, but here we are. My name is David. I'm 38, and for the past decade I've worked in a quiet corner office of a mid-sized logistics firm downtown, the kind of job where routine becomes a second heartbeat. Emily and I had been together almost 12 years, married for 9, and until that night I would have told anyone, without hesitation, that we were steady, grounded, unshakable. The shock came in the form of a reflection. We were at a colleague's birthday party in a softly lit restaurant near the river, the kind of place where the air smells faintly of citrus cleaner and grilled meat, and the hum of conversation folds into the low jazz playing from hidden speakers. I had stepped away from our table to grab another round of drinks, weaving through clusters of laughter and perfume. When I turned back toward our group, balancing 2 glasses of red wine, I saw Emily standing a little too close to Mark from her office. It wasn't what they were saying. It was the distance between them. Her hand rested lightly on his forearm, fingers curved as if testing the warmth of his skin. He leaned down toward her, his mouth near her ear, and she tilted her head in that subtle way she used to when I whispered something private. The overhead pendant lights caught in her hair, highlighting the soft copper strands at the nape of her neck. She laughed, not the open, easy laugh she used with friends, but something lower, contained, almost intimate. When she saw me watching, her hand dropped as if burned. Mark straightened, clearing his throat. The moment dissolved, like sugar in hot water. I told myself it was nothing. People flirt harmlessly at parties all the time. Emily had always been charming, socially fluid, able to make anyone feel seen. That was one of the things I loved about her. Still, when we drove home that night, the car filled with the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine and something sharper beneath it, I noticed she was unusually quiet. The streetlights flashed across her face in intervals, illuminating her profile in brief, golden frames. She scrolled through her phone, the screen lighting up her features from below, casting small shadows under her eyes. Fun night, I said, keeping my tone casual, my eyes on the road. Yeah, she replied quickly, almost too quickly. It was nice to see everyone outside the office. There was a pause that felt heavier than it should have. Later, in the bedroom, as she brushed her hair in front of the mirror, I watched her reflection rather than her directly. She avoided my eyes. Her phone lay face down on the dresser, something she had never done before. When it buzzed, she picked it up immediately and stepped into the bathroom, closing the door with a soft but deliberate click. I stood there, listening to the faint murmur of her voice behind the wood, my pulse echoing in my ears. Trust is a strange thing. It doesn't shatter all at once. It thins. That night, lying beside her in the dark, I told myself I was being paranoid. Work stress, too much wine, my imagination filling in gaps where none existed. But as I stared at the faint red glow of the alarm clock, I felt it, a small, cold shift in the air between us. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something had quietly begun to unravel. The first warning sign was already here. Psychologically, David experiences cognitive dissonance. His mind recognizes the intimate gesture as inappropriate, but his long-standing trust in Emily causes him to rationalize it as harmless flirtation. This early hesitation highlights a common blind spot in long-term relationships. When people are confronted with subtle signs of betrayal, they often downplay them to preserve emotional equilibrium. The juxtaposition of Emily's laughter and physical closeness triggers a latent anxiety in David, though he suppresses it, showing the tension between perception and rationalization. Trust, in this case, becomes both a protective mechanism and a vulnerability, delaying recognition of deeper betrayal. In the weeks that followed, life resumed its familiar rhythm on the surface. We still made coffee together in the mornings, the kitchen filling with the warm, bitter aroma of freshly ground beans. We still exchanged small updates about our days over dinner, plates clinking softly against the wooden table we had picked out together years ago. But something beneath that rhythm had changed. Emily began guarding her phone like it contained state secrets. It moved with her from room to room, even to the bathroom. If I entered unexpectedly, she would tilt the screen away with a smooth, practiced motion, her thumb sliding quickly across the display before locking it. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a show neither of us was really paying attention to, her phone buzzed repeatedly. The sound seemed sharper than usual in the dim living room. She glanced at the screen, and for a split second I saw the name Mark before she angled it away. "Work stuff," she said, her tone light but her jaw tight. "At 10:30? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She shrugged. "Big project. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I also knew that before this project, her evenings had belonged to us. Doubt became a quiet companion. It followed me to the office, sat beside me in meetings, hovered over my shoulder as I typed emails. I found myself replaying moments, her hand on his arm, the way she had laughed, the bathroom door closing softly that night. Then came the first real fracture. She told me she was meeting her friend Laura for drinks on a Friday night. I remember the way she stood in the doorway, adjusting her earrings, the faint shimmer of her makeup catching the hallway light. "Don't wait up," she said with a playful smile. "We might be out late." There was nothing unusual about that. Except Laura texted me around 9:30, asking if Emily had left yet because she hadn't shown up. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. When Emily came home after midnight, her hair slightly mussed, her lipstick faded unevenly, I was sitting at the kitchen table with only the small overhead light on. The room smelled faintly of cold pasta and something metallic, like tension itself had a scent. "How was Laura?" I asked. She froze for half a second, then recovered. "Good." We talked for hours. I watched her closely. Her eyes held mine, steady, almost defiant. "You sure?" I said quietly. "David," she sighed, placing her purse on the counter. "What is that supposed to mean?" The gaslighting began subtly. She suggested I was stressed, imagining things, that I had been distant lately, that maybe I was projecting. And for a moment, a dangerous, humiliating moment, I wondered if she was right. But the lie had been clear, undeniable. That night, as she slept beside me, her breathing slow and even, I stared at the ceiling and realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't imagination anymore. It was a pattern, and I needed to know the truth. At this stage, David begins to experience subtle psychological tension. His intuition signals a breach of boundaries, yet he struggles with denial. A typical mistake is to think that this is just a phase or a minor lapse, which explains his attempt to normalize her secrecy. The emotional impact is intensified by the sensory environment. The faint smell of her perfume, the dim lighting, the soft click of the bathroom door, all anchoring the sense of unease. Psychologically, this moment marks the start of internalized hypervigilance, where David begins to scrutinize small details for evidence, signaling the shift from passive trust to active suspicion. The first time I checked her phone, my hands were trembling. She had fallen asleep on the couch, the television casting blue light across her face. Her phone lay loosely in her hand. I stood there for several seconds, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain she would wake. Crossing that line felt like stepping off a cliff. But I told myself I wasn't looking for something to hurt me. I was looking for clarity. Her passcode hadn't changed. That somehow hurt more. The messages were there. Not explicit at first. Inside jokes, subtle innuendos, references to last night, and can't stop thinking about it. Then, as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. Photographs, plans, hotel reservations disguised as client meetings. My vision blurred. There was a video clip, brief, unmistakable. Her voice, breathless, laughing in that same low tone I had heard at the party. I felt physically ill, but anger did not explode outward. It condensed, hardened. Over the next week, I moved carefully. I activated location sharing on her phone under the guise of a new safety app. I followed her once, parking a block away from a boutique hotel downtown, watching as she stepped out of her car and walked inside. I recorded everything. Dates, times, screenshots. It became a quiet, methodical operation. One evening, as I sat in my car across from the hotel, rain streaking the windshield in slow, distorted lines, I saw Mark join her under the awning. He placed his hand at the small of her back. She leaned into him without hesitation. The image burned itself into me. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went home and began transferring files to a secure folder on my laptop. Each piece of evidence felt like another brick in a wall I was building, not to trap her, but to protect myself. By then, the shock had transformed into something steadier, resolve, and I knew the confrontation would have to be precise. Here, the consequences of betrayal begin to emerge more concretely. David's cognitive processes shift from rationalization to suspicion, signaling the mind's transition from trust-based reasoning to threat assessment. The delayed return home and conflicting stories trigger anxiety and a sense of loss of control. Emotionally, he experiences a mix of fear, doubt, and helplessness, which can manifest physically as tension, shallow breathing, or insomnia. Interpersonally, Emily's defensiveness and subtle gaslighting exacerbate the stress, creating a cycle where David questions both her honesty and his own judgment. This stage demonstrates how early betrayals, even minor ones, can destabilize relational security and begin the erosion of trust. I chose a Sunday evening. The house was quiet, the late afternoon light slanting through the blinds, striping the living room in pale gold. Emily sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, unaware that the air had already shifted. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up, cautious. I placed my laptop on the coffee table and turned it toward her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I pressed play. The video filled the room with a sound I will never forget. Her laughter, intimate and unguarded. Her face drained of color as realization set in. "David," she whispered. Then came the screenshots. The hotel confirmations. The location history. Mark's name appearing over and over again. At first, she tried denial. Then minimization. Then blame. "You've been distant," she said, tears forming. I felt alone. I listened. Calm. Controlled. "Did you feel alone in that hotel room?" I asked quietly. Silence. The facade collapsed piece by piece. She admitted it had started as emotional, that it had become physical, that she hadn't meant for it to go this far. I had already contacted Mark's HR department anonymously with evidence. Power had shifted, and for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. This is the moment of psychological rupture. Direct evidence of infidelity forces David to confront the reality of betrayal, eliminating denial entirely. The mind oscillates between shock, anger, and grief, while the body reacts with stress responses, adrenaline spikes, tension in the chest, and hyperawareness of surroundings. Psychologically, this stage often involves moral dilemmas and the assessment of consequences, whether to confront, retaliate, or silently gather more evidence. Importantly, the act of documenting proof reflects a coping strategy, reclaiming control in a situation that previously felt uncontrollable. Emotionally, David experiences both devastation and the first stirrings of resolve, illustrating how clarity can emerge even from painful awareness. I moved into the guest room that night. The house felt different, as if the walls themselves were aware of the truth. She cried, apologized, promised to cut contact. Mark was transferred to another branch office within days. Friends and family learned the truth gradually. I refused to carry her secret. There were moments of weakness, memories of vacations, shared laughter, the quiet comfort of routine. But each time I wavered, I returned to the evidence. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I consulted a lawyer, discussed separation. And yet, somewhere beneath the anger, there was grief for the life I thought we had. The confrontation represents the climax of emotional and psychological tension. Emily's collapse under undeniable proof highlights the power of accountability in relational dynamics. For David, this moment reinforces the interplay between composure and moral agency. By maintaining calm, he asserts control over both his emotions and the outcome. Psychologically, confronting betrayal directly allows for catharsis, a release of pent-up anxiety, anger, and grief. Interpersonally, this shift in power dynamics demonstrates that betrayal not only breaks trust, but redistributes agency between partners. The incident also introduces a moral boundary. One can respond with measured action rather than uncontrolled retaliation. Weeks later, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where so many ordinary evenings had unfolded. "I don't know what the future holds," I said finally, my voice steady despite the weight behind it. "But if we're going to try to rebuild this, it's going to take time, a lot of time." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I'm willing to wait for as long as it takes." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As for Mark, true to his word, or maybe just out of fear, he stayed away. I never heard from him again, and Emily later told me he'd been transferred to another office. Whether it was voluntary or forced, I didn't care. He was out of our lives, and that was all that mattered. In the end, Emily and I didn't go back to the way things were. We couldn't. But we started building something new, brick by brick. day by day. Whether it would last, only time would tell. But for now, it was enough. In the aftermath, the focus turns to personal growth and resilience. David's decision to leave the situation and establish boundaries reflects adaptive coping, emphasizing self-preservation and empowerment over resentment. Psychologically, this phase involves reconstructing identity post-betrayal, integrating lessons learned about trust, vigilance, and self-respect. Emotionally, relief coexists with grief, signaling acceptance of loss while nurturing hope. By controlling the narrative, documenting evidence, communicating truth, and removing the source of manipulation, David restores a sense of agency. This stage illustrates a central theme. Betrayal can catalyze growth when individuals consciously transform trauma into deliberate, constructive action. Across the story, trust, denial, and betrayal are deeply intertwined with psychological and emotional processes. Initially, David's trust blinds him to subtle cues, demonstrating the vulnerability inherent in relational reliance. As suspicion builds, denial collides with intuition, creating internal tension that primes him for active investigation. The discovery of evidence catalyzes intense emotional reactions, shock, anger, grief, while also enabling strategic decision-making. Confrontation serves as both catharsis and moral reckoning, emphasizing the importance of accountability. Ultimately, the narrative underscores personal empowerment. Surviving betrayal requires clarity, boundary setting, and reclaiming agency. Psychological resilience emerges not from ignoring pain, but from processing it, establishing control, and gradually rebuilding life on informed, deliberate choices.